They burned a 19-year-old girl alive in front of a cheering crowd, and her crime was wearing pants and saying God spoke to her. But here is the twisted part. The men who lit that fire knew she was completely innocent. And this is the story of how Joan of Arc went from being a celebrated war hero to being condemned as a heretic in less than a year. And trust me, what they did to her in that prison will absolutely make your blood boil. So let me take you back to May 23rd, 1430, in Compiègne, France, where Joan of Arc, this teenage girl who literally changed the course of an entire war, gets captured by Burgundian forces, and she becomes the most valuable prisoner in all of France. And you have to understand why. Because she crowned a king, and she defeated multiple English armies, and she made the impossible possible, turning the tide of the 100 Years' War. And the English want her dead more than anything in the world. So in November, they paid 10,000 francs, which was the price of 1,000 horses, just to get their hands on one girl. And they drag her to Rouen, which is the heart of English-occupied France, and throw her in a fortress controlled by the Earl of Warwick. But this is not about justice at all, because this is about destroying King Charles VII's legitimacy completely. Because if they can prove Joan was a witch or a heretic, then everything she accomplished becomes the work of demons, and Charles, the king she crowned, abandons her completely, doing absolutely nothing to help her. And then January 3rd, 1431 arrives, and an edict charges Joan with religious crimes, and her trial will be overseen by Pierre Cauchon, who is the Bishop of Beauvais and a complete puppet of the English occupation, and the charges include wearing men's clothing and claiming divine visions and refusing to submit to church authority, which is basically translation for, she challenged powerful men, and now she has to pay the ultimate price. On February 21st, the interrogations begin, and Joan walks into that chapel and faces Bishop Cauchon plus 42 clerics. And they are all men and all judging her. And she swears to answer truthfully, but refuses to say anything that might hurt King Charles. And for over a month they bombard her with questions, trying to trap her and trying to make her slip up and reveal something they can use against her. And then they hit her with the ultimate trick question, which is, are you in a state of God's grace? And you need to think about this for a second, because if she says yes, she is contradicting church doctrine, because no one can know if they have God's grace. And if she says no, she is admitting her visions are not from God, so either way she is completely screwed. But Joan, this 19-year-old peasant girl with zero legal training, looks them dead in the eye and says, if I am not, may God place me there. And if I am, may God keep me there. And even her interrogators go silent because they literally cannot fault the answer. And it is so brilliant that the initial 70 charges get reduced to 12 because she is that good at defending herself. And some clerics even start questioning the trial, with one stepping down completely, saying the whole thing is rigged, and another challenges Cauchon's authority and gets thrown in prison immediately. But here is where this gets truly horrifying. Throughout the trial, Joan is held in conditions that violate every single rule of church law, and canon law is crystal clear that female prisoners accused of heresy must be guarded by women, usually nuns, in church prisons. But Joan is chained to a wooden block in a military fortress guarded by English soldiers who hate her guts, and she is shackled and chained even in her cell. And she is never alone, with 5 guards total, with 3 inside her cell at all times and 2 more posted outside. So there is no privacy and no rest and no escape. And the soldiers taunt her constantly, and they harass her. And according to witness testimony from the later trial, she lived in constant fear every single day. And when she gets so sick she thinks she is dying, she begs to receive the sacrament and be buried on sacred ground. But they deny her, and the Earl of Warwick makes sure the guards do not kill her, not out of kindness, but because the English paid 1,000 horses worth for her, so they need her alive for the execution. And it gets even worse because witnesses later testified that a great English lord attempted to assault her physically. And you understand what I'm saying here, right? And this is why Joan kept wearing men's clothing, because it was not rebellion, it was survival, because tightly bound, laced men's clothing gave her protection that a dress could not, and she argued this over and over, that it was safer to dress like a man when surrounded by male guards than to wear women's clothing that left her vulnerable. But the judges did not care at all, and they used it as evidence of heresy. The psychological warfare they waged against her was relentless and calculated, designed to break her spirit and force her into submission. And they would interrogate her for hours on end, sometimes in the early morning when she was exhausted, sometimes late at night when her defenses were down, and they twisted her words and misrepresented her testimony and tried to create contradictions where none existed, all while she remained chained in that dark cell, isolated from any friendly face or word of comfort. And the weight of abandonment must have been crushing, because the very king she had fought for, the man whose crown she had secured through her courage and faith, did nothing to negotiate for her release or even speak on her behalf, leaving her utterly alone to face the full might of English power and ecclesiastical corruption. On May 23, 1431, Joan is brought before the tribunal, and the University of Paris has reviewed her case, and the verdict is that her voices are demons and her clothing is wicked, and her refusal to submit makes her a heretic, so they tell her to recant or burn. And the next day, they take her to the cemetery and put her next to a stake. And she is terrified, because after months of torture and isolation and abuse and being abandoned by her king, Joan breaks, and she signs a confession admitting she lied and agrees to wear a dress, and her sentence becomes life in prison. But it does not last, because days later, Cauchon visits her cell, and Joan is wearing men's clothing again. And she claims her voices told her she was wrong to recant, and that she had to tell the truth even if it meant death. But witnesses at the 1456 rehabilitation trial told a completely different story, because they said the guards stole her dress during the night and left her with nothing but men's clothing and forced her to put it on. So it was a setup and a trap to justify her execution. And some witnesses even testified that the guards may have done more than just steal her clothes, that they may have tried to force themselves upon her, which is exactly what she had been trying to protect herself from all along. On May 28th, Bishop Cauchon interrogates Joan in her cell, and she admits she is wearing men's clothing again, and says her voices reproached her, and that is it, because under canon law, a relapsed heretic gets no second chance at all. And on May 29th, the judges unanimously agree that the sentence is death by burning. And then May 30th, 1431 arrives. And in the morning, Joan is allowed to receive the sacraments, which is an act of mercy that technically violates church law for a condemned heretic. And then they lead her to the old marketplace in the heart of Rouen, where a massive crowd has gathered, and in the center of the square stands a tall plastered pillar, and she should be formally handed to the bailiff for secular sentencing. But instead, the English take direct control, and Joan is tied to the pillar, and she asks to see a cross as she dies. And an English soldier, moved by her plea, fashions a simple cross from 2 sticks and gives it to her, and she kisses it and holds it to her chest. And then they bring a processional crucifix from the church, and she embraces it, and they bind her hands and hold it before her eyes, and the flames are lit. And as the fire rises, witnesses hear Joan crying out over and over, and her final word, shouted above the roar of the flames, is Jesus. And she was only 19 years old, and after her death, the executioners burn her remains twice more to make sure nothing is left, and they throw her ashes into the Seine River to prevent anyone from collecting relics, because the English think they have erased Joan of Arc from history, but they are so wrong. Because 25 years later, Joan's mother, Isabelle Romay, a woman who never stopped believing in her daughter's innocence, demands a retrial, and 115 witnesses testify, many of them people who had been there, who had seen the corruption firsthand, who had watched a young girl be railroaded by a system designed to destroy her. And the court declares the 1431 verdict invalid because it was tainted by bias and riddled with errors and procedural violations, and they acknowledge that Joan was a victim of a political prosecution disguised as a religious trial. And then in 1920, the Catholic Church canonizes her as Saint Joan of Arc, So the woman they burned as a heretic becomes a patron saint of France. And if you had been standing in that marketplace on May 30th, 1431, watching a 19-year-old girl call out to God while flames rose around her, would you have recognized it for what it truly was, which is judicial murder dressed in religious robes? Because the trial was never about heresy at all, but it was about destroying the symbol that made French victory possible and English occupation untenable. And they killed the girl, but the legend lived forever and continues to inspire people around the world centuries later as a symbol of courage and faith and resistance against injustice. And if you want more dark history stories like this, subscribe to Vile History and hit that notification bell. Because history is not always heroic, and sometimes it is absolutely vile, and I will see you in the next one.